Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Patriot's History. I'm Larry Swikart, co-author with Michael Allen of A Patriot's History of the United States, now in its 41st printing. And I am reading, as always, from the 15th anniversary edition. And as always, if you have an earlier edition, you're probably okay with 10 and up. If you get before 10, things are going to be off quite a bit. You'll have to hunt around and find where we are. Usually the headers line up, and I am at the header in Chapter 6, The Promise and Perils of Jackson's America. I am at the header called The Restless Spirit. Now, just a word of programming here. I will not be here Friday. I will be here Wednesday, but we won't have a lesson on Friday. I am leading a tour of the Reagan Ranch, the Reagan Library, and the Nixon Library in California. And so I won't be here this Friday or next Monday, but I should be back a week from Wednesday. So we'll see if I'm too tired to do it then, or if I can get it in. All right, let's get started. From the outset, this is page 197, The Restless Spirit. From the outset, America has been a nation of entrepreneurs, a country populated by restless souls. No sooner had settlers arrived along the port cities than they spread inland, and after they had constructed the first inland forts, trappers and explorers pressed further into the forests and mountains. The restless spirit and the dynamic entrepreneurship fed off each other, the former producing a constant itch to improve and invent, the latter demanding better ways of meeting people's needs, of organizing better systems of distribution and supply, and of adding to the yearning for still more and improved products. In a society where most people still work the land, this incessant activity worked itself out in the relationship with the land: cutting, clearing, building, irrigating, herding, hunting, lighting and fighting fires, and populating. Unlike Europeans, however, Americans benefited from a constantly expanding supply of property that they could possess and occupy. Unlike Europeans, Americans often never saw themselves as permanently fixed in a location. Alexis de Tocqueville, the observant French visitor, remarked, "An American will build a house in which to pass his old age and sell it before the roof is on. He will plant a garden and rent it just as the trees are coming into bearing. He will clear a field and leave others to reap the harvest. He will take up a profession, then leave it, settle in one place, and go off somewhere else soon with his changing desires. If his private business allows him a moment's relaxation, he'll plunge at once into a whirlpool of politics." Folks, I got to tell you, that's me. I've been a college student, then a rock musician that was on the road for many years, then a college student again, then a professor. Briefly, not full-time, but briefly, I was an aerobics physical fitness instructor. I have been an author. I have produced 2 movies. I've done film, I've done TV, I've done all sorts of weird and different things all over the place. Even when we were in Ohio, my wife and I moved 3 times in our first 5 years, and 4 times total, all within a mile of each other. And we've been here in our current house in Arizona 7 years, and she's already saying, I want a bigger house. We got 5 bedrooms and 3,200 square feet. And then she complains about having to clean it, right? But nevertheless, this is us to a T. I get bored easily doing one thing. I like to keep doing and trying different things. And if I can't do something, I obviously won't do it. You certainly don't want to see me trying to build a cabinet or even hammer 2 boards together. I'm not good at that. I'm terrible with anything mechanical. But other than that, if it's in any intellectual activity or exercise, I'm there for it. So I very much fit what Tocqueville was talking about. To some degree, money or the lack thereof dictated constant churning. The same desire to experience material abundance drove men and women to perpetually invent and design, innovate, and imagine. The motivations for moving, though, were as diverse as the country itself. For every Daniel Boone or Davy Crockett who constantly relocated out of land fever, there was a Gale Borden, a New York farm boy who wound up in Galveston, Texas, where he invented the Terrapin wagon, a completely amphibious vehicle, before returning to New York to invent his famous condensed milk process. In the same vein, Vermonter John Deere, who moved his farm implement business steadily westward, developing the finest farm implements in the world, epitomized the restless frontier spirit observed by Tocqueville. You probably have seen the great movie Tombstone with Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer. And you'll remember that Wyatt Earp was first in Dodge City, Kansas, but then he moves out to Arizona territory to ostensibly farm, but then he decides he wants to own a casino, but he off and on has to become a law enforcement officer to make sure people aren't stealing his stuff. But this is very, very common, this constant moving around. And Theodore Roosevelt, right, from Oyster Bay, New York, ends up out in the West at what we would call today a dude ranch, ostensibly managing it, but not really. But he does that for a couple of years. And then he goes to Washington, D.C., ultimately to serve as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Then he volunteers to join to lead, really, as a colonel, a cavalry unit that goes into the War of 1898, Spanish-American War, as a cavalry officer with the Rough Riders. So this churning is an interesting phenomena that seems built into the American character, that things can be better. And if I don't get it right this time, I'll get it right next time. I'm going to try again, maybe not here. And there is a fascination with new and different places as being the best place to live, which explains why so many Americans just kept moving west and west and west and west, because the next place was going to be better. All right. This restless generation produced a group of entrepreneurs unparalleled in American history, including Andrew Carnegie, born 1835, J.P. Morgan, 1837, John D. Rockefeller, 1839, Levi Strauss, 1829. Most came from lower to middle class backgrounds. Carnegie arrived in America virtually penniless, and Strauss worked his way up with a small mercantile store. They typified what a Cincinnati newspaper said of this generation. Quote, "There is not one who does not desire, even confidently expect, to become rich." Carnegie's story, which we'll get to later, was quite amazing. He and his cousin came over. He was 13, and he got on a ship and crossed the ocean at age 13. Now, I know times are different, but how many of you won't even let your kids out to the park alone at age 13, right? But he crossed the ocean at age 13. One of my band members, Kevin, hitchhiked from Mississippi to Arizona at age 13. So times are really, really different now. But Carnegie started as a bobbin boy, then ended up as the personal assistant to the head of the Pennsylvania Railroad. And he was so industrious and so impressed the owner that the owner took him under his wing and began to show him management and investment tips. And Carnegie began investing money as a very young man, so that by his 30s, he was able to start investing in bridges. And he created a bridge company. Again, we'll see all this later. But the point is, many of these people had no money at all. They literally pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. I know that liberals hate that today. They hate to hear people say that today, but it's true. And most of them did it without perpetually harming other people or taking advantage of other people. You can point to Carnegie maybe smashing a strike here and there, or to Rockefeller possibly undercutting the competition with what were legal but unethical pipelines. Nevertheless, these guys did it, and for the most part, they did it out of a genuine desire to make other people better off, namely the consumers. They often didn't think as much about their own employees, but they did have on their mind constantly, how can I make the consumer's life better? Yet the lure of the land had its dark side, turning otherwise honorable men into scalawags and forgers. Jim Bowie, who would later die at the Alamo with Davy Crockett in 1836, surpassed everyone with his ingenuity in developing fraudulent land grants. One writer noted that whereas Bowie was, quote, hardly alone in forging grants, he worked on an almost industrial scale compared to others. Through a labyrinth of forged documents, Bowie managed to make himself one of the largest landowners in Louisiana, garnering a total holding of 45,700 acres. An official smelled the rat, but Bowie managed to extract all the suspicious documents before they landed him in jail. Land attracted small farmers to Indiana, then Illinois, then on to Minnesota and Wisconsin. Assuming that the minimal amount of land for self-sufficiency was 40 to 50 acres, it took only a few generations before a father would not bequeath to his son enough land to make a living, forcing countless American young men and their families westward. Southern legal traditions with vestigial primogeniture, or the custom of bequeathing the entire estate to the eldest son, resulted in fewer landowners and a smaller population, but larger estates. Men like Bowie thus dealt not only in land, but also in slaves needed to run the plantations. Whether it was the Yazoo in Mississippi or the forested sections of Michigan, land hunger drew Americans steadily westward. Abundant land and scarce labor meant that even in agriculture, farmer businessmen had to substitute new technology for labor with every opportunity. Handmade hoes, shovels, rakes, and the like soon gave way to James Woods's metal plows, whose interchangeable parts made for easy repair. This and other designs were mass-produced by entrepreneurs like Charles Lane of Chicago, so that by the 1830s, metal plows were commonplace. Pittsburgh had, quote, 2 factories making 34,000 metal plows a year, even in the 1830s. And by 1845, Massachusetts had 73 plow manufacturing firms, turning out more than 60,000 farm implements a year. No more important, but certainly more celebrated, the famous McCormack Reaper, perfected by Cyrus McCormick, opened up the vast prairies to agribusiness. McCormick began on the East Coast, but relocated to Chicago and to be closer to the land boom. After fashioning his first Reaper in 1834, he pumped up production until his factory turned out 4,000 Reapers annually. In 1855, in an exhibition in Paris, McCormick stunned Europeans by harvesting an acre of oats in 21 minutes, 1/3 of the time taken by the continental European machines. If land provided the allure for most of those who moved to the Mississippi and beyond, a growing but important substrata of mechanics, artisans, inventors, salesmen, and merchants soon followed, adapting their business to the new frontier demands. No one captured the restless, inventive spirit better than Eli Whitney. After working on his father's farm in Connecticut, Whitney enrolled in and graduated from Yale. There he met Phineas Miller, who managed some South Carolina properties for Catherine Greene, and Miller invited the young Whitney to take a position as tutor to the Greene children on the plantation. His cotton gin, in retrospect, a remarkably simple device, shook the world, causing an explosion in textile production. I think you could probably make a pretty good argument that next to the wheel, the cotton gin was probably the single most important invention in all of human history in terms of how it changed the entire world, how it affected slavery, how it brought on the Civil War, how it affected England and the textile mills, how it affected the American textile industry. It was just world shattering. In 1810, 119 pounds of cotton per day could be cleaned. That is, they take the seeds out by hand. And by 1860, that number had risen to 759 pounds per day. Mrs. Green soon came to say of Whitney, "He can make anything," unquote. Indeed, he could. Whitney soon tried his hand at musket production using a largely unskilled workforce. What emerged was the American system of manufacturing, which served as the basis for a powerful expansion in production. Advances in mass production, steam power, and management techniques coalesced in the textile mills founded in New England by Samuel Slater, a British immigrant. Slater built a small mill in Rhode Island with the support of Moses Brown, a Providence candle manufacturer, first using water wheels, then replacing water with steam power. Within 20 years, Slater and his close circle of associates had 9,500 spindles and controlled nearly half of all American spinning mills. I should add, all powered by steam. Brown even wrote to his children that the mill founders had, quote, cotton mill fever, unquote. Francis Cabot Lowell exceeded even Slater's achievements in textile production, employing young girls who lived on site. Lowell further advanced the organizational gains made by Whitney and Slater. Lowell came to employ these farm girls, and he would go around to the farms and recruit them. And he promised A, to pay them, B, to give them an education, and C, to house them safely with security guards so no men came around or whatnot. And they were known as the Lowell girls. And for quite a while, they were very productive and dominated his mills. But they were put out of work by cheaper labor, the Irish, who came in and replaced the women. So kind of an interesting story there. Gains in manufacturing resulted in part from widespread application of steam power. John Fitch, with clockmaker partner Henry Voigt, invented the steamboat in 1786 and demonstrated it to members of the Constitutional Convention the following year. But the unfortunate Fitch acquired a charter to run steam service on the Delaware River, which was easy to sail and had broad roads running up the sides, and after losing his investors' money, committed suicide. As his biographer, Kirkpatrick Sale, observed, quote, Fitch picked the wrong river. In Fitch's wake, so to speak, came the more commercially savvy Robert Fulton, whose steamboat Clermont demonstrated profitable steam propulsion on the water in 1807. Allied with Robert Livingston, Fulton got a charter to operate on the more profitable Hudson, which made better financial sense, and the technology had improved since Fitch's death as well. The steamboat revolutionized transportation. So I know it's often taught, well, Robert Fulton invented the steamboat. No, he didn't invent it. Fitch did, but Fulton popularized it and made it a usable, viable economic proposition. Within a decade, Cornelius Vanderbilt began using steam technology to cut costs in the New York, New Jersey ferry traffic, and steam power started to find its way to inland waterways. Entrepreneurs had already started to shift the focus of water travel in the interior from natural rivers to man-made canals. The period from 1817 to 1844 had been referred to as the Canal Era, in which some 4,000 miles of canals were constructed at a cost of $200 million. States collaborated with private interests in many of these projects, usually by guaranteeing state bond issues in the case of default. So the state would issue, let's say, Ohio Canal bonds. And these would be private bonds of the Ohio Canal Company. But if they went broke, the state of Ohio's taxpayers would pay the investors. States collaborated with private interests in many of these projects, usually by guaranteeing state bond issues in case of default, but some of the earliest and best were built by private businesses, such as the Middlesex Canal in Massachusetts and the Santee and Cooper Canal in South Carolina. The most famous, the Erie Canal, linked the Hudson River and Lake Erie and opened up the upstate New York markets to the coast. Unlike some of the other early privately financed canals, the Erie was built at state expense over an 8-year period, and its completion was so anticipated that the state collected in advance $1 million in tolls before the canal was even opened. It was a massive engineering feat. The canal was 40 feet wide, 4 feet deep. That's really shallow, right? And they used really shallow canal boats, not ships, on these canals. And 363 miles long, all bordered by tow paths to allow draft animals to pull barges and flatboats. So generally, you would hook your flatboat up to a pair of oxen who would pull it up the river, but you could also do poling, which was very hard, intensive work. 86 locks were used to raise and lower boats 565 feet. So here's your waterway. And you got to go uphill, right? Uphill. So you build a series of stair-step locks in which the ship would come in and you would open this, open this lock, and the lock above it, which was at a higher elevation, the water would come in and gradually raise the ship up. Then you would sail a ship into the next lock at the higher elevation, close the previous lock off, and rinse and repeat, do that over and over. To go down, you just did the opposite. You sail into the lock, right? And you would open this lock, and the ship would drop, seal it off, sail on. After the, let me see. When the Erie opened in 1825, it earned 8% on its $9 million investment from the 3,000 boats traversing the canal. After the Board of Commissioners approved enlarging the canal in 1850, it reached its peak tonnage in 1880. I'll do 2 more paragraphs here. Steam power soon replaced animal power on all the nation's waterways. Well before steam power was common, however, canals had driven down the cost of shipping from 20 cents per ton mile to 1/10 of that amount. And even, quote, noted financial failure like the Ohio Canal yielded a respectable 10% social rate of return. Now, this is a complex economic concept, social rate of return. It's how much everybody benefited from having the canal, not just the investors. So in theory, the investors could lose money and everybody else would be better off. But it is commonly used by economists. Steam vessels on the Great Lakes, where ships occasionally exceeded 1,000 tons, and in the case of the City of Buffalo ship, displaced a whopping 2,200 tons, also played an important role. By mid-century, quote, the tonnage on the Mississippi River and on the Great Lakes exceeded that of all shipping from New York City by over 200%. The canal era provided the first model of state government support of a large-scale enterprise through bond guarantees, often with disastrous results. In the Panic of 1837, many states were pushed to the brink of bankruptcy by their canal bond obligations. Steam also reduced shipping costs for oceanic travel, where again Cornelius Vanderbilt emerged as a key player. Facing a competitor who received sizable federal mail subsidies, Vanderbilt nevertheless drove down his own transatlantic costs to the point where he consistently outperformed his government-supported opponent. Let me do one more. Having won on the Hudson, then on the Atlantic, Vanderbilt's next struck on the Pacific coast, breaking into the subsidized packet steamer trade. Vanderbilt's competition received $500,000 in federal subsidies and charged a staggering $600 per passenger ticket for a New York to California trip via Panama, where the passengers had to disembark and travel overland aboard another vessel. Sounds like Disneyland, where they're charging $194 per person per day just to get into the park. Vanderbilt chopped passenger prices to $400 from $600 and offered to carry the mail free for the government. Within a year, thanks to the presence of Vanderbilt, fares dropped to $150, then to $100, 1/6 of what they previously had been. As occurred in the Hudson competition, the Commodore's competitors finally bought his routes. In other words, they bought him out rather than compete with him. But even then, they found they could not return to the high ticket prices they charged before he drove costs down. So this is a great example of an entrepreneur coming into a market, competing, bringing the price down everywhere. And even if he leaves the market, the prices don't ever go back up to that monopolistic level. When Vanderbilt left the packet steamer business, a ticket cost just half what could be fleeced from passengers in the pre-Vanderbilt era. All right, we'll stop there because now we're going to get into railroads. So we'll pick up with railroads there on Wednesday. So I'll see you on Wednesday. Meanwhile, folks, buy me a coffee. I need help in making Patriots History the video. If you've already bought me a coffee, you should be receiving this week a video update where we do a Zoom discussion with me and the screenwriter director, Alan Peterson, about where we are in the process, what happens with a screenplay, what's involved, how far we have to go, what different things cost. And so we just lay it all out for you, and you can see how things are coming along. They are coming along, but we have a long way to go. So buy me a coffee, and I'll see you guys back here on Wednesday.